and welcome back to Beyond's fourth and final video taking a look at London by William Blake. In this instalment, we'll be looking at language and how the poet's literary techniques and word choices help to convey his ideas. When you first read London, you probably get the impression that Blake saw it as a rather dreary place, dystopian rather than utopian, Gotham rather than Galapagos. The sun doesn't shine here, even though it's written in what could be a bouncy ABAB rhyme scheme. What stops that rhyme scheme from providing any sense of merriment is the language. I challenge you to find a single word or phrase in this poem that carries positive connotations. Face and flow in stanza 1 is probably as close as we get to raising a smile, but we've already covered the issue of the River Thames being charted and not flowing freely, while the faces surrounding Blake are covered in marks of weakness, marks of woe. The negative, dismal language puts a down on things. More importantly, it's integral to the poem as polemic and Blake's sustained attack on the corruption of the city. Marks of weakness, marks of woe is also one example of repetition, and this too is significant to Blake's message. As in writing to persuade, repetition is a key technique for putting an argument across. Here, Blake uses it to hammer home those negative feelings. He is like a politician campaigning for change. However, the poet in Blake is still there in the subtle tricks with language. In the preceding line, mark in every face I meet, he uses mark as a verb, meaning to observe. He is compelling us to look. And what are we looking at? In the next line, it becomes a noun, an impression or disfigurement. The oppression of the city has physically impacted on its inhabitants. Their misery is etched onto their faces. London is never directly personified, but Blake still manages to convey the sense that it is beating up its poorer residents. The repetition continues in the second stanza, which, as we said in the last video looking at themes, traps generations in a cycle of misery. The repetition of the word every gives a strong impression of how widespread the corruption and misery are, while the repetition of cry across stanzas 2 and 3 creates an auditory landscape that nobody really wants to listen to, but listen we must. The other sounds that can be heard are a sigh, curse, and blasts. The combined effect is to portray London as hellish, characterised by constant suffering. The alliterative, mind-forged manacles are a vivid metaphor for the hopelessness and feeling of captivity experienced by the working class. As we learnt in the first video on context, Blake was a painter as well as a poet, and the imagery in stanza 3 rivals Hieronymus Bosch's depictions of hell. The sinisterly sibilant, hapless soldier's sigh, which runs in blood down palace walls, is a grotesque, disturbing metaphor. The picture conjured by Blake may have been intended to remind contemporary readers of the French Revolution, which began only 5 years before Songs of Innocence and Experience was first published in 1794. Across the Channel, there had been a violent uprising against an oppressive state, and the blood on the palace walls suggests that a similar event could happen in London if issues of inequality and poverty are not addressed. Violence is also suggested by the sound of the language, specifically the plosive alliteration of blood, blasts, blights, which actually sounds explosive. Finally, there's the upsetting image of the youthful harlot struggling with her newborn babe and the oxymoron marriage hearse, which was discussed in form and structure for being such an effective image to end with. Blake appears to be suggesting that this is a city in which religion is no longer a balm and the last rites are being read. So, key language techniques used are repetition, alliteration, and metaphor, but it's the effect that's most important. Portraying London as a city that's gone to the dogs and providing a wake-up call to those responsible. Thank you for staying with us to the bitter end, and we hope you found this series of videos on London helpful. Don't forget that we have others, so please search for any other content that you need, and you will also find a link to London notes in the video description below. Keep going with that revision and good luck.